Heyo everyone, the Awakening Dosa PvP guide is finally here. I apologize for taking way too long in getting it released, but let's get into it. Now, I've been playing Awakening Dosa since release. I've no-lifed it in Guild League, which resulted in me getting some top stats by the information Perlabus released. You can definitely push high AOS damage numbers and pull your weight on this spec. At the current state, it definitely has its issues as every class, but in general it's a good PvP class with the exception of 1v1s where it is unfortunately really bad. Awakening Dosa isn't overly complicated at its core, but there are a lot of small details that can really improve your gameplay. I'll try to cover everything. The main mechanic of Awakening Dosa revolves around rotating elements. We do have fire, wood, water, metal, and earth. Passive ability that ties the spec together is this one, and if you rotate the elements correctly, you'll trigger buffs. For example, transitioning from fire to wood grants a 5% special attack damage buff. This buff also applies to teammates, though it won't work if they are in an iframe, and keep in mind that the buff radius isn't massive, so positioning is important. The radius is roughly right here. I would hit both of these guys if they were my allies with the buffs. Now for gear, it's simple. You just go full DR, you don't even think about evasion. Awakening Dosa doesn't have any evasion buffs nor passives, and it scales incredibly well with DR. And to get the plus 10% DR buff, you need to go from water to metal. And by doing that, you get the 10% DR buff to you and your allies around you. And this is something that can actually be very tricky in combat because the metal abilities are essentially unprotected. I will go over different strategies, tips and all of that later on though. Now for AOS, this is the AOS build that I use. I have Elcars, Red Spirits and Olucas. I go with Vipers, Negotiation, Macalods and then Max Health in chest. I would highly suggest that you always go Vipers. You can of course change stuff out what fits you the most, but in the current meta, not playing with Vipers is extremely punishing whenever you get into all of these evasion carpet stackers. These are the add-ons that I use, which are tailored for my combos, and if you do go into my Twitch chat, you can always find updated add-ons and crystals by typing out these commands. Now when it comes to locking skills, there's only one skill that you absolutely should lock, and that's Downpour. This ability adds nothing of value to your kit. The only thing that this does is disrupt the flow when trying to use Blinding Slash for its super armor rotation, which causes a frontal to occur at the start instead of a full super armor, so definitely just lock this, has 0 value. Now on top of locking stuff, we don't have any other abilities that we specifically want to lock, but in terms of the Black Spirit Rage, there's definitely a lot of stuff here that is good to get rid of. First of all, the 200% are complete ass. It's not even worth attempting to use them, they are really bad. You have the 100% for the Awakening. This one is way too slow, like it takes you 200 years to get it off. It's pointless, lock it. Now, I personally don't think that the Fire Blaze is worth using. It doesn't really add any added benefit except for a little bit extra damage. It's not, you never use this for damage anyways. I personally lock this. Then we have these two. These are actually very good, both of them. I personally don't use them because I prefer to use the C Consume for the attack speed and AP buff instead at 100%, but if you do want some extra mobility, for example, the 25% is pretty good. The regular SE ability winds you back and then propels you forward a little bit. But if you use it with the BSR version, it does this. It's way quicker, travels you way further as well, so it is something that I use from time to time, but it does consume 25% and I feel like it would be a little bit more valuable if it was the 10% instead. So I don't use these a lot. Now the pre-awakening 100% is something that I do use. It is a mobility skill that helps you a little bit with stamina, it creates some distance and does quite a lot of damage, but it is risky to use if there are grab classes close to you, so because you're stationary at the start and at the end, So be careful when using this, and if you want to be more safe, just use Sea Consume instead. And then we have the last one, which is Wood Bend. This one in theory is pretty decent, but unfortunately it only has a stun at the first hit and then a knockdown at the last hit. The thing is with this that you have to basically stand in it the entire duration to get the value that you want from it. And standing inside that ability is extremely risky in most PvP scenarios unless you have someone CC'd on the ground, because this basically puts a massive red blinking arrow above your head saying grab me. Every single person that sees this ability and knows about Dosa will charge you into a grab immediately. So the Shift F ability is something that you mainly use as a defensive super armor ability where you regen stamina in it and put debuffs and buffs up on you. So what I do with this ability is I have DP and then negative human damage on it. So I don't ever use this offensively unless I don't have anything else to press, of course. But you use Shift F and then you cancel out of it whenever someone charges you for the grab. Which is why I don't really recommend ever really using this either, but it is still a good one regardless. I just personally don't use it. Now there's 4 pre-awakening abilities that gets converted into awakening versions. This is Velum Slash, Burga Shaft, Cloud Step, and lastly D-Pace. All 4 of these abilities gets some variations of them into the awakening kit. And the downside is that all 4 of these abilities are significantly worse in their awakening version. The abilities are essentially the same, but they are slower, less fluid, lacks abilities to flow from, and are much clunkier to use. It's a frustrating design, but it's something that we have to work around with. So that means that ideally you want to keep using these in pre-awakening instead, exception being your shift space to fly. And the best way to use these properly in my opinion is to hotbar Cloud Step into Velum Slash, into side RMB, into RMB CC. This is your main CC catch as succession, so if you're familiar with that, it's the same excluding the frontal F, since you cannot use frontal F without transitioning to awakening. That can be bypassed by unlearning the frontal F in awakening, but that's quite niche. I do it a lot, but I'll stay away from discussing that too much in this guide, but if you want, play around with that, otherwise just have it learned. Stamina management is a big issue on Awakening Dosa, since you have a lot of stationary and slower abilities, which means that you have to constantly cancel these and side dash around. And the key to not be draining out of stamina too fast is to properly rotate these 3 abilities. And that is going to be SF, Space, and F. And these are all pre-awakening skills and you can chain these together. So if you start off with SF, into space, and then you can F right after. And I highly recommend to always use SF on cooldown for repositioning, escapes, and stamina free movement, and always chain space right after. And if you are in desperate need for stamina and you don't have grab classes right next to you, you can start chaining F, and to shift RMB as well if you have it ready. But the bread and butter is SF, space, and F. And now you can also go into a bit more stamina heavy super armor protection, because you can stay fully protected 100% of the time, and I will start weaving in some rotations and show you how. And as you see, I'm still on 100% stamina. So you can move around like this without ever really losing your stamina. It is going to keep costing stamina, so if you're on low stamina, you might not be able to escape doing this properly. And of course, you are going to be stationary quite a lot with these abilities where you can get grabbed if someone is chasing you. But realistically, you can be 100% protected while moving around. Now you do have a lot of CC catches, but not a lot of them are that good, which makes it really difficult to 1v1s against good opponents, but in AOS for example it's good enough. Your three primary CCs will be SRMB, which is a frontal into an unprotected ranged knockdown. And then you have Winged Kick, which is frontal RMB, which is a fully protected knockdown. And then you have Velum Slash, which is a pre-awakening ability that you can use in awakening by clicking LMB after certain abilities. Typically you want to use this one after frontal F, or right after your direction shift. Do note that Velum Slash is unprotected at the CC part at the very end, so you can get CC'd from it and you can't cancel that gap even while chaining other abilities. Still gonna be a short little gap in there. Or like I mentioned earlier in the video, where you use it from your hotbar Cloud Step. Now you do also have additional ranged CCs, which are Shift LMB, S LMB, and then we have Shift RMB, which is a stiff, and the flow is a knockdown. So we have a lot of ranged CCs because all of these are fully ranged. Shift LMB is a stun, the flow is nothing, and the third flow is a knockdown. If you do Shift LMB, you hold down LMB, you go into this one, then you keep holding it down, and then you go into this one, which will be a stun into a damage into a knockdown. And then if you do the same thing with Shift RMB, you do a stiff into a flow knockdown. And this allows you to have a lot of different options when nuking people from range with different combos. And the best way for you to utilize all of these ranged CCs are the ability to fly for repositioning. The downside is that every one of your ranged abilities keep moving you forward. This makes it extremely clunky to stand on high ground and nuke because you keep moving forward towards the edge and eventually fall down unless you reposition, so keep that in mind. Now we've gone over all of the basic stuff, and I will go a bit more in depth on how to utilize this entire kit now. First, we need to really understand the elemental proc and synergies. As I mentioned earlier, the core mechanic relies around this passive and properly rotating the elemental procs for buffs and the debuffs. Do note that you can use non-elemental abilities in between these combos and it won't break the elemental effects. Now the buffs themselves are not necessary to combo someone besides the special attack damage buff, but this can also be obtained by forward RMB pre-buff or within the combo. There is also another buff that you have, which is 20 AP that you get every single time you use an elemental ability, but this is something that you don't really have to think about because this is going to be permanently up. Every single elemental ability you do is going to permanently just refresh this. Your only damage related debuffs on targets comes from the elemental procs, but then you also have your SE, which is a 5 seconds cast and attack speed slow at 20%, and then SQ and Shift Q, which has a minus 20% movement speed slow. And then some of the other self buffs that you have are forward RMB, 5% special attack damage, and then frontal F, which is a plus 20 DP buff as well. These you can keep up 100% of the time. You don't have to completely rely on rotating the elements within the actual combo, I rarely do, but it is very important that you at least do one elemental proc very early in the combo. The reasoning is that on every elemental proc you put a negative 20 DP and a negative 6% evasion shred on your target. This is exactly what makes giving combo tips very hard on Awakening Dosa, because your combo needs to be different depending on which CC you catch your target with. For example, if you catch someone with SRMB, you can dive in with E into F. This will now proc the elemental synergy since fire into wood is the correct order, and since you did do the E ability in between, which is not an elemental skill, it doesn't break the flow. And from here you can start freestyling a bit depending on which core you use, abilities available and so on. And if you would catch someone with Velum into Winged Kick, you now don't have any elemental synergies ready, and you now need to apply 2 elemental skills to get the negative DP shred for your Till burst. And since Till is earth, you want to use metal, But you can't use S, L, and B because that would cap your target, and you need your float on the Shift Q till to be able to nuke them. But since they are on the ground, you can use Shift L and B, which is a stun, but won't apply nor cap them since they are already on the ground, and people cannot be stunned on the ground. So then you can just send Shift Q right after, which will proc the elemental synergy, apply the -20 EP, float them and blow them up with the air attack. Both of these combos are of course just examples, but the general rule of thumb is that in every combo you want to get elemental proc, and then either fire or wood for special attack buff, or forward R&B for the special attack damage buff. These do not stack, so either of them works fine. And then if you are, for example, in more of a group fight, you might not be able to send these combos, and you want to stay ranged as much as possible, and then go in for E, gap close, into Shift Q nukes whenever you have the opportunity. And use Shift F for SE trading when you're not in a state to be easily grabbed. And always remember to use SE, SF and space as much as possible for relatively safe movement. And in order for you to be able to use the flight ability for repositioning, you want to do space into shift space. And in terms of hotbars and cancels, we don't have a single ability in the Awakening kit that we can hotbar swap into Awakening with, but your E buff needs to be on the hotbar. But for transitioning you use frontal F or direction shift, which will instantly transition you into Awakening. And to transition from Awakening to Pre-Awakening, you either use your Rabam or you use your SF. These are the only two abilities that I use to transition from Awakening to Pre-Awakening.
I stay awake all night while my fears all come to life, tearing me up inside. I haven't slept in 3 days, and my fears dance around as I lay.